Hi, everyone. Welcome to 52 Weeks of Leadership, week 49 of our series. My name is Molly Anderson, and I'm the Executive Director of the UB Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. And we are excited for today's speaker on the topic of the importance of written communication and leadership, a new look at leadership through the lens of writing. And with us is Jesse Miller, PhD, Clinical Assistant Professor of Writing and Professional Communication here at the UB School of Management. He's going to talk about the principles of effective writing, and he's well versed to do so. He has a PhD and master's in English literature from UB, and he's a member of many professional organizations, including the Modern Language Association, the National Book Critics Circle. So he's well qualified and ready to go. Before we begin, I just want to remind everybody that you're welcome to put some questions for Dr. Jesse Miller in the chat. And as always, we want to thank our sponsor, Geico, for making this series possible. Thank all of you for participating in this series week in and week out. And without further ado, Jesse, welcome to the series.
Great. Thanks so much, Molly. So let me just get my slides going. Can everyone see the slideshow okay?
You're good.
Awesome. So despite how it looks, I'm not actually here to unveil the latest Apple product, but I do think that we can learn a lot about communicating effectively through writing from thinking about the design of the iPhone. So I thought we'd start kind of looking at this image. If you could, in the chat, maybe share a word that you would use to describe the appearance of this product, the iPhone. Like what's a word that you would use to describe what this product looks like? Ooh, we got 3 sleeks in a row. What else? Ooh, lots of sleeks. Unassuming. Anything else? Give it a second. Simple and elegant. 1 minute. So we look at a product like the iPhone and we think it looks sleek, it looks unassuming, it's simple, it's elegant. And these are precisely the qualities that made these products stand out when they were first released. Steve Jobs, when describing the quality, he captured this with the word simplicity. And he remarked upon this quality of simplicity in Apple products with the following quote. So he said, "Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple, but it's worth it in the end, because once you get there, you can move mountains." So I think what Steve Jobs is getting at here is that things that are simple seem easy, and they do because they're easy for a user to use. But that simplicity masks all of the work that goes into making something simple. And this is true of writing as well. And in his really famous book on writing, classic, E.B. White writes about the importance of this very same quality, but now referring not to iPhones, but instead to writing. So E.B. White says, "A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines, and a machine no unnecessary parts." So in products, as well as in writing, we see that simplicity requires work. It's something that we have to work to achieve. But that simplicity serves a really important purpose. It makes things happen, whether we see it in terms of Steve Jobs, where he says, simplicity is what allows us to move mountains, or for E.B. White, the simplicity is what allows the machine to work. And for an iPhone and for writing, there's a purpose behind this simplicity. What does it allow us to do? It allows us to connect with others. I want to repeat this again because it's really important, which is that just like the iPhone, Simplicity is important in written communication because it allows us to connect with others. I think this is something that people sometimes forget. We often think about writing as a way of transmitting information from one place to another, but also as a bit of a hassle. It takes a lot of work to write well. And we think maybe, if we could communicate telepathically instead of having to do all the annoying work of writing emails or things like that, it would be better, it would be more efficient. But in fact, when we communicate in writing, there are actually two things that are happening. We're transmitting information to somebody who isn't there, but we're also creating and maintaining relationships. And that second part isn't a hassle. It's actually crucial. We think of a leader as someone who gets things done with and through others. Then writing is one of the tools that helps us to do that. But unless all those people who we're trying to get things done with, who we're trying to accomplish goals with, unless those are all robots, then using written communication effectively requires creating a balance between the drive for clarity, which is trying to get the information across as simply as possible, and the desire to build meaningful relationships, which is at the heart of what a leader does. So how do we accomplish this? How do we find that difficult balance between, on the one hand, creating clarity, on the other hand, building relationships? So I want to share what for me are the 5 most important principles of professional writing that help us to create this balance. And these are principles that I use in my own writing. They're the things that I come back to again and again when I'm teaching professional writing, and I wanted to share it with you. So first of these principles is don't mumble. By don't mumble, what I mean is say exactly what it is you want to say and be really specific. Don't use complex language where something more simple would do. So just trying to say what you want to say. Second principle, keep it short. This means use short paragraphs, use short sentences. But what's important with keeping it short is that we want to keep things as short as they can be and no shorter. So different situations are going to call for different degrees of shortness. A text message can be a lot shorter than a business plan, for example. But we still want to keep that business plan as pithy as we can. Okay. Next one is organize clearly. We want to make sure that when we're communicating, we're not just going off on a kind of stream of consciousness rant, but we're organizing our ideas in a way that's going to make what we're trying to say as clear to our reader as possible. And one of the things that we can do to help accomplish this is to, for example, offer our readers a preview of what we're going to say or what we're going to be talking about, kind of give them a heads up. Here are the 3 things I'm going to cover in this message. And using what I call roadmaps in our writing to let people know, okay, I just talked about this, now I'm going to talk about something new. So we're helping our readers to see how our ideas are organized. Number 4 is generate goodwill. When we're communicating, we want to not only transmit information, but also try to connect with our readers on a genuine human level. We want to think about with each person that we're communicating with, this is going to look different. It's going to look different if we're communicating with someone we know really well compared to someone who we don't know at all. But in all of these cases, we can find ways to create that kind of human connection so that we're not just kind of like typing something in to program a machine, but we're instead actually communicating with someone. And finally, the last principle that I wanted to share is using the you viewpoint. What this basically means is that when we're writing, we want to think not just from our own perspective about what we want to say or what we want to get done, but we want to think from our audience's perspective, thinking about what do they want and what do they need, and how can we use that knowledge to help us to achieve whatever it is that we're trying to achieve together. So these are, for me, the 5 things that are most important in professional writing that, when combined together, allow us to balance that desire for, on the one hand, clarity, and on the other hand, building relationships. So I thought, as a way to kind of close things up, we could take a look at an example of what this looks like when it goes wrong and what we might do to make it better. So here is an example of what I would say is an ineffective message. So this is an email that's being sent. Take a moment. You'll see subject line, you still have not responded. And then the message, you still have not responded about the t-shirts for the fundraiser. Don't waste my time and make me ask again. We are running out of time. So looking at this email, if you feel like it, in the chat, I'd be curious to see if you have any thoughts about what's the problem with this message. You've got someone who is frustrated, they're trying to work on some kind of fundraiser that involves t-shirts, and they're having trouble getting a response. If you have any thoughts that you want to share in the chat about what's the problem with this? The all caps are not good. Using all the all caps comes across very harsh, unprofessional, does not take the audience's feelings into consideration, negative approach, no goodwill, does not give a deadline, not about the relationship. Wonderful. Anything else? Not constructive, saying you versus I, self-focused, accusatory, it's you. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the reason why I shared this particular example is because I think when we first look at it, we might think, well, okay, it's pretty harsh, but at least it is, it's short, and it seems like it's not mumbling, right? It seems like it's saying exactly what's on its mind. So it's saying what's not on its mind. The problem is really that it's not generating goodwill. But I think even the aspect of mumbling we can see here, and this comes up in one of the comments that somebody mentioned about not giving a deadline. So we look at this bad example, not only rude, but also it's unclear. The person who's receiving this email might not know precisely what they're referring to. They might not remember the previous email. This email doesn't say exactly what it is. Hope Standall, the writer of it, doesn't say exactly what is it that she wants the recipient of this email to do. She doesn't say by when she wants it to be done. So not only is it aggressive and perhaps unprofessional, but it's also not particularly clear. We get this sense of frustration. How do we turn that into something that will actually allow the message to come across and for Hope to achieve what she wants to achieve? So I'll show you the example that I've come up with of how Hope might have revised this. So here we have revised version, same issue, but drawing on the principles that I mentioned before. So here we've got our subject regarding fundraiser t-shirt design approval. And here's the message. Hi, Barbara. I hope your semester is going well. Just wanted to follow up to see if you've had a chance to review my previous email. As I mentioned, I'm trying to organize an end of semester fundraiser and need your approval on the t-shirt design, which I've attached again here for you to see. Please tell me if you're okay with the design by the end of the week. That way, I'll be able to proceed with the project and you won't need to come to the extra meeting. Best, Hope. So we see in this version, we start with a really specific subject line so that Barbara, the recipient, knows what is this about. We see in the first little paragraph that Hope has provided some context and the main point. She's connecting on a human level with Barbara, thinking about, okay, this is someone who's busy in the middle of the semester, reminding her of what this is all about, what is the fundraiser. And then in the final paragraph, giving the recipient a specific task and also thinking from her viewpoint. So for example, in that last sentence where she says, that way I'll be able to proceed with the project and you won't need to come to the extra meeting, thinking about, okay, what's something that Barbara is going to care about that might help to encourage her to act in the way that Hope wants, which is to provide the information that she needs. So we see in the comparison between these two texts, although this one is slightly longer than the first example, it's as long as it needs to be in order to really clearly get its idea across, and to do so in a way that connects with the person who is being communicated with. So again, looking at the comments that people mentioned, this is a much more collaborative approach rather than a kind of dictatorial one. Instead of being accusatory or self-focused, it's really thinking from the perspective of the person who's being communicated with. And so just in closing, we can see how in this example, we are applying these 5 principles that I mentioned before. We're not mumbling. We're saying exactly what it is that we need to say to be clear. And that's not just expressing frustration, but making sure things like, what is it that I'm writing to you about? What is it that you need to know? When do I need to know it by? That's being communicated. We're keeping it as short as it needs to be, but not any shorter. The ideas are organized clearly. We're not just forcing information out of somebody, but we're doing it in a way that connects on a genuine human level. And we're partly doing that by thinking from our audience's perspective, thinking about where is their thinking coming from? What do they need and how can we help to meet them? So I hope that this quick introduction to what I think are the key principles of professional writing has been helpful. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have about any of these 5 principles that I've laid out, or anything else about professional writing that maybe you've experienced that we can talk about for a couple of minutes together.
Well, thank you, Jesse. We do have a question in the chat from John. How effective do you believe writing assisted tools such as Grammarly are?
So I think that these kind of assistive tools like Grammarly can be really helpful. I think that they work best when we treat them not as the end of the revision process, but as one tool that's part of it. So for example, something that I see a lot with undergraduate students that I teach is they will, plug a piece of writing into Grammarly. It will give them some feedback, and they will just kind of accept all of that wholesale and assume, well, if Grammarly said it's right, then it must be right. But Grammarly, while really helpful, is also, it's not a human reader, it's a machine. And so it doesn't get things right all the time. And so for me, I often find it useful as a way to help me catch things that I maybe didn't notice before, but I always take that into consideration with what am I trying to say and what do I know as someone who's spent a lot of time writing. So I think when it's used as an assistive tool, really helpful, but I would say avoid letting that be the final say on what you're writing and what you're sending.
Thank you. There's a question from Cynthia. Would you comment about the process of writing well also helps the writer to clarify his or her thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, Cynthia, I think that's a really great point, which is that, I think sometimes we think, oh, in order to write, I need to have everything in my head and then I just get it onto the page. But a lot of times the process of writing itself is a way of really figuring out what it is that we want to say. And so sometimes, if we have an important email that we have to write, or if we're working on a proposal for something, we'll sit down and we'll have a little bit of an idea, but the process of writing is also a process of clarifying those ideas. As we sort of start to organize things, kind of going back to that idea of organizing clearly, we start to get a better sense of what we're trying to say ourselves. So sometimes what I'll do when I'm working on a piece of writing is I'll sort of sit down and just write out whatever ideas I have at the time, and then I'll start to mess around with them. I'll move them in different places. Maybe I'll take something that I wrote towards the end and move it to the beginning, and then I'll start to expand on things. And through that process, I come to understand better what it is that I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Michael asked, as a member of Toastmasters, I suggest these principles can also be applied to professional speaking. For example, when speaking or writing to a technical audience or peers, jargon is okay, but when speaking or writing to a non-technical or mixed audience, jargon should be avoided. And he wants to know if you agree with that. What are your thoughts on word choices and jargon?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for sure, these principles are useful for writing, but they're really useful for any kind of professional communication, whether that be public speaking in front of a large group, or even running a meeting or something like that. As far as the question of word choice and jargon, I think kind of underlying these 5 principles is maybe the most important thing, which is that whenever we're communicating, we need to understand what the communication situation is. So who are we communicating with and why are we communicating with them? And so depending on what that situation is, we're going to change up the way that we communicate. And just like that, the question mentioned. So if we're communicating with an audience with a high technical knowledge, if we're communicating to a group of programmers, we might use jargon that we wouldn't use if we're talking about app development to an audience that doesn't have that kind of technical knowledge. So there's not although these 5 principles are applicable, I think, in any writing situation, there's not a one size fits all approach, which is why I mentioned, for example, like keep it short doesn't mean everything has to be 1 sentence long, but that we're keeping things as short as they can be based on the situation. And similarly for not mumbling, what counts as clear is going to depend on who we're communicating with. So really at the beginning of whatever writing task you're trying to accomplish, really starting by thinking about, okay, who am I communicating with? What do they know? What do they need to know? What do they care about? So really starting from that viewpoint and going from there.
Larry asked, what are your thoughts on reducing the use of the word just in written communications? He said sometimes it sounds like we're afraid to approach when we use just. Many sentences would not lose their meaning if the word just was removed.
So I'm imagining you're thinking of a situation like an email where you might write something like, just checking in to see whether you've accomplished X task, or just wanted to follow up. I think anything overused stops having its usefulness. But I also think that that kind of what we might call like hedging language that makes things less forceful, can be a useful way of shaping the relationship that we're creating with someone. And so in some ways, I think that kind of language depends, again, on who we're communicating with. If we want to kind of soften the effect of what we're saying, not to come across as too forceful. I think saying something like, hey, you know, just checking in to see how things are going, I don't see a problem with that. I think, as with anything, like I said, overuse is where the problem arises. So I wouldn't say like, I don't have a blanket, like always cut out those justs, but I think it is valuable to think about it when you're writing and to think, okay, with what I'm writing, do I really need all of the kind of filler language that I have here? Is it really serving a necessary purpose, or can I cut some of this out? Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's what allows us to create that human connection, and sometimes it's just a kind of reflex that we engage in. So what we want when we're writing is to be self-aware enough that we're not being reflexive and that we're making our choices consciously.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jesse Miller, for sharing your principles of professional writing, just like your presentation, short and sweet and to the point, and gave us a lot to think about as we write our next email or business brief. So thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us. Next week, we have Tom Murdoch on the topic of leading the entrepreneur's way. So you won't want to miss it. I hope you'll all join us as we finish out our series, and just want to give you a little teaser. We do have plans for 2022, and we did just add a bonus episode with Jim Lemoyne on the Great Resignation. So you want to check out our website so you can rewatch Jesse Miller's talk and see what else is there. All right, see everybody. Have a great week. Thank you again.
Great, thanks everyone.